A gloomy morning in Reno. Robbie Martin woke up in his rundown trailer on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada. The roof leaked when it rained, and the floor creaked under the slightest movement. His alarm clock buzzed angrily at 6 a.m., but Robbie had already been awake for an hour, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. Another day, another grind. Robbie, 35, was a professional underachiever. He worked at Lucky Sud's car wash, scrubbing mud and grease off SUVs while his boss, Chuck, barked orders and called him useless, at least 3 times a shift. The job paid just enough to keep his trailer lights on and his fridge stocked with beer and expired microwave burritos. He didn't dream of yachts or mansions. He just wanted out of this relentless cycle of bad luck and disappointment. At a desperate gamble after clocking out of the car wash, Robbie headed to the Rusty Horseshoe, a dingy bar he visited almost daily. The neon sign flickered outside, casting a sickly green glow on the gravel parking lot. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and regret. Robbie! Eddie, his best and only friend, waved him over. Eddie was a stocky guy with a mullet and a knack for betting on horses and losing. "You're late. I've been sitting here all day," Eddie complained, sliding a cold beer toward Robbie. "Some of us have jobs, Ed," Robbie muttered, taking a sip. Eddie leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. "Speaking of jobs, you know what's better than one? Winning the lottery. Powerball's at $100 million right now." Robbie snorted. "Yeah, and my chances of winning are about as good as me becoming the CEO of Amazon." Eddie shrugged. "Come on, live a little. It's $20. You'll blow that on beer anyway." Robbie hesitated, then fished out a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket, the last of his paycheck after rent and overdue bills. He walked to the bar, where a battered lottery ticket machine stood like a beacon of false hope. "Quick pick," Robbie told the bartender. The machine spat out a slip of paper with 6 random numbers. The morning after, Robbie tossed the lottery ticket onto his cluttered kitchen counter that night and promptly forgot about it. The next morning, he woke up to his usual routine. Slap the snooze button, drag himself out of bed, and shove a stale Pop-Tart into his mouth. As he scrolled aimlessly through his phone, a news alert popped up. Winning Powerball numbers announced. Jackpot hits $100 million. With a groggy curiosity, Robbie grabbed the crumpled lottery ticket from the counter and compared it to the numbers on his screen. 17, 23, 41, 56, 62. Powerball 7. His heart stopped. The ticket in his hand matched every single number. Robbie's hands started to shake. He read the numbers again, then again. "No way," he whispered, his voice trembling. "No freaking way." He stumbled back, nearly knocking over a pile of dirty dishes. A surreal buzz filled his head, a mixture of disbelief and euphoria. He, Robbie Martin, the man who couldn't win a game of darts at the Rusty Horseshoe, had just won $100 million. What now? Robbie sat down at his wobbly kitchen table, staring at the winning ticket as if it might vanish. He tried to calculate what to do next. Should he call someone? Go to the lottery office? Hire a lawyer? Before he could decide, his phone buzzed. It was Eddie. "Hey man," Eddie said. "You see the Powerball numbers last night? Some lucky bastard in Reno hit the jackpot." Robbie swallowed hard. Yeah, I saw." "Well, it sure as hell wasn't me," Eddie laughed. "Anyway, see you at the bar later?" Robbie mumbled something incoherent and hung up. He was no longer Robbie the loser. He was Robbie the millionaire. But as the reality of his win started to sink in, a new thought crept into his mind. What if someone found out? The lottery office, the Nevada State Lottery Office, was nothing like Robbie imagined. Instead of a glamorous building with champagne and confetti cannons, it was a dull government office with flickering fluorescent lights. The clerk at the desk, an older woman with thick glasses, barely looked up as Robbie slid the winning ticket across the counter. I think I won," Robbie stammered, his heart racing. The woman examined the ticket carefully, her expression never changing. Finally, she spoke. "Yep, that's the one. You're the jackpot winner." Robbie's knees nearly gave out. "Congratulations," the woman added dryly. shoving a mountain of paperwork at him. "You'll need to fill all this out. After taxes, your take-home amount is about $60 million. $60 million, Robbie whispered. Even with taxes, it was more money than he could ever spend in a lifetime, or so he thought. The lucky guy from Reno. Within 24 hours, Robbie's name was everywhere. The news, social media, even local radio. He hadn't even claimed the money yet, but reporters were already calling him the lucky guy from Reno. By the end of the week, Robbie had been on 3 morning shows, posed for pictures with a giant novelty check, and even had a crowd of strangers chanting his name at the Rusty Horseshoe. At first, the attention was exhilarating. People who'd never given him a second glance were now congratulating him, patting him on the back, and offering to buy him drinks. Even his boss at Lucky Sud's car wash tried to be nice. "Guess you won't be coming back to scrub bumpers, huh?" Chuck said with a forced laugh. "You got that right," Robbie replied, walking out without a second thought. The spending spree with millions in his bank account. Robbie dove headfirst into his new life. He bought a bright red Ferrari, even though he barely knew how to drive stick shift, at a sprawling mansion in the hills outside Reno, complete with a pool, home theater, and 6-car garage. A wardrobe full of expensive suits and shoes, because he thought that's what rich people wore. He also took care of a few overdue debts. Paid off the rent he owed his landlord. Left a $1,000 tip at the Rusty Horseshoe. Lent Eddie $5,000, which Eddie immediately lost betting on horse races. For the first time in his life, Robbie felt unstoppable. The begging begins, but the joy didn't last long. First, his phone started ringing constantly. Old friends, distant relatives, and even people he barely knew were asking for a small loan or a little help. One guy from high school claimed they were like brothers and asked for $50,000 to start a food truck business. Then his ex-girlfriend Lisa showed up. Lisa had dumped Robbie years ago, calling him a broke loser. Now, she was back, batting her eyelashes and talking about the good old days. "Robbie, I made a mistake," she cooed, sitting way too close on his new leather couch. "I always knew you were destined for something great." Robbie wasn't sure what annoyed him more, the blatant lies or the fact that he almost believed her. The threats start rolling in. If the begging wasn't bad enough, Robbie began receiving strange letters in the mail. At first, they were just angry rants from people demanding money. But then they turned darker. "You don't deserve this money. Ido. Pay me $100,000, or I'll make you regret it." Robbie shrugged off the first few threats as jokes, but when he found a brick thrown through his mansion window with the words "Pay Up" scrawled on it, he realized this wasn't a joke. He tried calling the police, but they weren't much help. "Mr. Martin, it's common for lottery winners to attract attention," the officer said. "We'll open a case, but I'd suggest you hire private security." And so Robbie hired a bodyguard, a massive man named Hank, who always wore sunglasses and spoke in grunts. At first, Robbie felt safer with Hank around, but even Hank couldn't stop what came next. The warning call late one night, while Robbie was lounging in his hot tub, his phone buzzed. The number was unknown, but something about it made his stomach twist. He answered hesitantly. "Hello," a deep, distorted voice crackled through the line. "Enjoying your winnings, Mr. Martin?" Robbie froze. "Who is this?" "Doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is you're sitting on my money." "What are you talking about?" Robbie asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm talking about $60 million. Half of it belongs to me now. If you don't pay up, you'll find out what happens when people don't share." The call ended abruptly. Robbie stared at his phone, his heart pounding. For the first time since winning the lottery, he didn't feel lucky. He felt hunted. Enter the financial advisors. A few days after the threatening phone call, Robbie was approached by 2 sharp-dressed men as he left a steakhouse in downtown Reno. One introduced himself as Mr. Gray and the other as Mr. Finch. "We're financial advisors," Mr. Gray said with a polished smile. "We help people like you, new millionaires, manage their wealth and avoid pitfalls." Robbie hesitated, but they were persistent. They talked about diversified portfolios, tax shelters, and secure investments. Most of it went over Robbie's head, but it sounded legitimate. Besides, he was overwhelmed by how quickly money was slipping through his fingers. "Let's schedule a meeting," Gray suggested. "We can turn your 60 million into 200 million. Robbie agreed. The shady deal at their meeting, Mr. Gray and Mr. Finch presented a glossy brochure for something called the Global Opportunity Fund, a high-yield investment vehicle that promised incredible returns. "You put in 30 million, Finch explained, "and in 5 years, you'll triple your money." Robbie scratched his head. "But can't I just keep my money in the bank? Like, under a mattress or something?" The two men chuckled politely, as if Robbie had told a clever joke. "Robbie," Gray said, leaning forward, "if you don't let your money work for you, you'll lose it. Inflation, taxes, parasites. Trust us, this fund is the best way to secure your future." Reluctantly, Robbie signed the paperwork. The Mafia comes knocking just as Robbie was starting to feel good about his smart investment. Trouble came from another direction. Hank, his bodyguard, knocked on the door of Robbie's mansion late one night. "You've got visitors," he said. His voice low. 3 men in black suits waited in the foyer. They introduced themselves as representatives of Tony Big T Marcello, a local mob boss. "Mr. Marcello has a simple request," one of the men said, sliding a manila envelope onto the table. "A donation. Say, 10 million. Robbie's jaw dropped. 10 million? Are you out of your mind? The man smiled coldly. "Consider it a fee for protection. Reno's a dangerous place for someone with your kind of money." When Robbie refused, the men left without a word. But the next morning, he woke up to find the Ferrari's windshield smashed and a dead fish left on the driver's seat. Hank shrugged when Robbie asked what it meant. "It means pay up, or worse is coming." Discovering the scam feeling trapped, Robbie called Mr. Gray and Mr. Finch to see if he could withdraw some money from the Global Opportunity Fund to deal with the mob. "Ah, Robbie," Finch said, sounding nervous. "Unfortunately, that's not how these investments work. The money is tied up for now." "Tied up? What does that mean?" "It means," Gray interjected smoothly, "that you need to trust the process. These things take time." Something about their tone felt off, and Robbie's paranoia kicked in. He did some digging online, searching for information about the Global Opportunity Fund. What he found made his stomach churn. The fund was a scam, a Ponzi scheme. The polished advisors had vanished from their office, and their website was suddenly offline. Robbie's $30 million were gone. Desperation sets in now broke. With the mob breathing down his neck and only a fraction of his winnings left, Robbie spiraled into despair. He fired Hank, sold the Ferrari, and locked himself in his mansion. Eddie came over to check on him. "Man, you look like hell," he said, plopping onto Robbie's couch. "I lost half my money to con men," Robbie said, rubbing his temples. "And the mob wants the rest." Eddie whistled. "That's rough. But hey, at least you still got, what? 10 million. 7, Robbie corrected bitterly. "Well," Eddie said, "if the mob's gonna take it anyway, why not spend it first? Go out with a bang." Robbie glared at him, but the idea stuck in his head. If the money was a curse, maybe it was time to do something crazy with it. Making a plan after hours of pacing his living room, Robbie came up with a desperate plan. He wasn't going to give the mob his money, not without a fight. He needed to outsmart them just like the con men had outsmarted him. But to pull it off, he'd need help. And there was only one person crazy enough to join him, Eddie. "This is either gonna make us legends," Robbie told him, "or get us killed." Eddie grinned. "Let's do it." Setting the trap, Robbie and Eddie started working on their plan. They knew the mob wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, so the key was to make the money seem unattainable or gone for good. The first step: fake a bankruptcy. Robbie used what little cash he had left to hire a shady lawyer, who filed bogus documents claiming that Robbie had lost all his money in bad investments. The story was leaked to the press. Reno's $100 million lottery winner broke after massive Ponzi scheme collapse. The article was all over the news the next day, and it worked. The public, including the mob, now believed Robbie was completely penniless. The road trip, but Robbie knew a fake bankruptcy wouldn't stop the mob for long. They'd want proof or revenge. So, Robbie and Eddie packed up the essentials, withdrew the remaining $7 million in cash, and hit the road in Eddie's beat-up RV. Their goal? Lay low until the heat died down. But trouble seemed to follow them everywhere. In Bakersfield, California, they were pulled over by a cop who got suspicious about the heavy duffel bags in the RV. Robbie panicked and offered the officer a $1,000 bribe, which worked, but left them both shaken in a small Arizona diner. Eddie accidentally bragged about their adventure, catching the attention of a con artist who tried to follow them. Robbie noticed the man tailing them and had to lose him in a Walmart parking lot in Nevada desert rest stop. They were approached by a mysterious woman who claimed to be an investment consultant. Eddie almost fell for her pitch, but Robbie dragged him away, realizing they couldn't trust anyone. The mob tracks them down. The false bankruptcy had fooled most people, but not Tony Big T Marcello. The mob boss wasn't buying the story and sent his men to track down Robbie. Late one night, as Robbie and Eddie were camping at a remote site in Utah, headlights appeared on the horizon. Eddie peeked out the RV window and cursed. "They found us," he hissed. 3 black SUVs pulled up, and a group of armed men got out. Robbie's heart raced as they knocked on the RV door. "Come out, Martin," one of them shouted. "We just want to talk." Eddie whispered, "You got a plan for this?" Robbie swallowed hard. "Yeah, run." The chase Robbie floored the RV, plowing through the campsite as the mobsters jumped into their SUVs and gave chase. The RV's engine roared as it sped down the winding desert roads, but the bulky vehicle was no match for the sleek black cars behind them. Eddie scrambled to the back of the RV, tossing out anything he could find. Pots, pans, even a folding chair. It didn't slow the mob down much, but it made for a chaotic scene. Robbie spotted an old dirt road leading to a canyon and swerved onto it. The narrow path was barely wide enough for the RV, but the mob followed. "Are you trying to get us killed?" Eddie screamed as the RV skidded dangerously close to the edge of the canyon. "Trust me," Robbie shouted back, though he didn't sound very convincing. The standoff, the chase, ended when the RV finally broke down, its engine coughing and dying in the middle of the canyon. The mobsters surrounded them, guns drawn. Robbie and Eddie stepped out with their hands up. "Where's the money, Martin?" One of the men growled. Robbie took a deep breath. "It's gone. I invested it, lost it, everything. I've got nothing left." The mobsters didn't believe him. One of them grabbed Eddie by the collar. "If you don't start talking, your buddy's gonna take a one-way trip off this cliff." "Wait," Robbie shouted. "I do have something left." He pointed to the RV. "The last of the money is hidden inside." The mobsters exchanged glances, then ordered Robbie to show them. With shaking hands, Robbie opened the RV's storage compartment and revealed the duffel bags filled with cash. The double cross as the mobsters greedily grabbed the bags. Robbie gave Eddie a subtle nod. Eddie pressed a button on a small remote he'd been hiding. Suddenly, the RV exploded in a cloud of smoke and fire. Not enough to hurt anyone, but enough to create chaos. Amid the confusion, Robbie and Eddie sprinted away, diving into a hidden ravine where they'd stashed a pair of dirt bikes earlier. They sped off into the night, leaving the mobsters coughing in the dust at a desperate gamble after escaping. Robbie realized they couldn't keep running forever. If they wanted to survive, they had to take down Marcello once and for all. Eddie looked at him like he was insane. "Take down the mob? Are you nuts?" But Robbie had a plan, a wild, dangerous plan that just might work. Setting the final trap, Robbie's wild plan was simple. Lure Tony Big T Marcello and his men into a setup that would either bankrupt the mob or expose them to law enforcement. It was dangerous, borderline suicidal, but Robbie was desperate. The first step was to use the remaining cash, just under $2 million, as bait. Robbie and Eddie made their way back to Reno, keeping a low profile and staying in cheap motels. Using burner phones, they started spreading rumors through Eddie's shady contacts. Robbie Martin still has cash left, and he's planning to gamble it all in one big poker game at the Grand Mirage Casino. Robbie knew the mob had ears everywhere. They'd take the bait. The high-stakes game, the Grand Mirage Casino, was one of Reno's most notorious gambling spots, rumored to have ties to organized crime. Robbie and Eddie walked in one Friday night, dressed in cheap suits they'd picked up from a thrift store. Robbie's duffel bag of cash drew plenty of attention as he strolled into the VIP poker room and sat down at a table. Within an hour, Tony Marcello himself arrived, flanked by two of his goons. The mob boss was an intimidating figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cigar permanently clenched between his teeth. "Well, well," Marcello said, pulling up a chair across from Robbie. "I heard you were broke." Robbie forced a grin. "Let's just say I found a little rainy day fund." Marcello leaned forward. "You owe me, Martin. That money belongs to me." Robbie didn't flinch. "Then win it. Sit down, Tony. Let's play." The game begins. The poker game was tense. Robbie wasn't a great player, but he'd spent the past week learning every trick he could from Eddie and YouTube tutorials. Marcello, on the other hand, was a seasoned gambler. He played aggressively, raising the stakes at every opportunity. The pot quickly ballooned to over $4 million, with nearly all of Robbie's cash on the line. Eddie watched nervously from the bar, sweating bullets. "You sure about this, kid?" Marcello growled, studying Robbie's face. Robbie smirked, hiding his fear. "You'll just have to call and find out." Marcello called. Robbie laid down his cards. A full house. It was enough to win the pot, sending a ripple of shock through the room. But the victory was short-lived. Marcello wasn't here just to gamble. The mob strikes back before Robbie could leave with the winnings. Marcello's goons blocked the exit. "Nice hand," Marcello said, standing up and puffing on his cigar. "But the game's over, Martin. Hand it over." Robbie raised his hands innocently. "All right, Tony, you win. Take it." He motioned to the duffel bags on the table. The goons rushed forward, stuffing the cash into their arms. That's when the alarms went off. The sting operation. Unbeknownst to Marcello, Robbie had been working with the FBI. After losing millions to scams and threats, Robbie had contacted a federal agent who specialized in organized crime. The FBI agreed to help him in exchange for a chance to take down Marcello's operation. The cash in the duffel bags? It was marked by the FBI as Marcello and his men tried to leave the casino. FBI agents swarmed the building, weapons drawn. "Tony Marcello, you're under arrest," an agent shouted. The mob boss turned to Robbie with a murderous glare. "You set me up, you little—" "Sorry, Tony," Robbie said, stepping back as agents cuffed the mobsters. "I guess I finally got lucky." A clean break with Marcello behind bars. Robbie was finally free. The FBI recovered most of his stolen money from the fake investment fund, though he still lost a significant chunk to taxes and legal fees. Robbie decided to keep only a modest amount for himself. He gave the rest to Eddie, his lawyer, and a charity that helped victims of scams. A new beginning. Months later, Robbie was back in Reno, living a quiet life in a small but cozy apartment. He'd opened a modest auto repair shop, something he'd always dreamed of. Eddie, meanwhile, used his share of the money to start a taco truck business. It wasn't wildly successful, but it kept him out of trouble. One evening, as Robbie closed up shop, he found a lottery ticket lying on the ground near the counter. He picked it up, chuckling to himself. "Nope," he said, tossing it into the trash. "Not this time." For the first time in his life, Robbie Martin wasn't chasing luck. He'd found something better. Peace. The end. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, because that's what inspires me to write interesting stories for you. Share in the comments why you listened to this story to the end. Write what you wanted to hear the next story about.